And so this is the Plan of Conservation and Development Committee. It's Wednesday, March 8th, 2023, 6 o'clock. And we're having our meeting at 23 Union Street. So I'm calling the meeting to order. I'm Frank Manfredi. I'm the chairman of the Commission on the City Plan in Norwich. I have Rich Morrell with us from the ZBA or Inland Wetland. I always get mixed up. We have Deanna, our planning and neighborhood director, and we have Dan Danifka, our planning director. And I'm sorry,
Sydney Phelps from Community Development.
Sydney Phelps from Community Development here with us at 23 Union Street, and I think we have a few other people joining us by Zoom. That's Tucker Salz from Desegregate Connecticut, Pat McLaughlin, our Public Works Director, Les King, a member of the Commission of City Plan, and Regan Miner from the Norwich Historical Society. Is that about it?
Yeah, I think Jeff Briney's coming from NPU. He just texted me, but I think that's probably everybody tonight.
Okay, so with that said, I think we can get moving, and I think our first order of business is an approval of the minutes from the November 9th, 2022 meeting, as well as the minutes from the January 11th, 2023 meeting. If somebody wants to make a motion regarding those minutes.
This is Les. I'll make a motion to approve the November 9th minutes.
Okay, we have Les for a motion from Les to approve the November 9th meeting minutes, second by Rich Morrell. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So those are approved, and there's the January 11th minutes, if somebody wants to make a motion regarding those.
Yeah, Frank, this is Les King. I wasn't at that meeting, so I will have to abstain from this one.
Okay, were you here, Rich?
Yes, I was here. I moved that we approve the meeting minutes from January 11th.
Okay, so there's a motion by Rich. Do we have a second? Anybody second it? I guess I can second it if nobody else can, since I was here. So I'll second that. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 But also, we don't have any old business, and under new business, we have, I think, a presentation by Mr. Salz from Desegregate Connecticut. So, do you wanna?
Do you have a screen you want to share for your presentation?
I do, if that's all right.
Oh, great, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. I had to double check this one. I had an embarrassing situation where I saved over one of these presentations with another town, and when I pulled it up, it said a different town. It looked very silly, but it looks like I got this one correct. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for having me. I'm Tucker Salz. I work for Desegregate Connecticut as our legislative director. I was at the Capitol today. I don't usually dress quite this formal for these kinds of presentations. Mostly because these kinds of presentations are really designed to get feedback for our.
It's on our end or your end?
It's our end.
It's our end.
Where, are you having trouble hearing me?
Yeah, you're cutting out a little bit. I'm told that it's on our end and not yours.
Okay.
It sounded good to me. Here.
Alleviate that, and I'll note for the record that Police Chief Pat Daly has just arrived. Yes.
Let me know when you if you need me to test the audio again.
Hearing you again. You want to try it?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. We
Awesome. Okay. Well, am I good to continue then? We're all set?
We're gonna try.
I think the best we can do is just have you go along and we have the visuals, so we
Sure.
can go along with that for what we might be missing.
Okay, sure thing. Well, desegregate for a little background on us is we're a pro homes coalition. Basically what it means is we work to make zoning reform around the state to help make housing more inclusionary, promote economic prosperity through different types of diverse housing options like your duplexes, quads, small apartment buildings, things that are often called in this world missing middle housing. So something in between the giant skyscraper and the single family home. Specifically, but we have the all of the above approach. So we come meet with municipalities like we're doing now. We'll work at the state levels to pass legislation, and we'll go and we'll do other things like walk audits is one of our things that we do, where we'll go to a train station, take like an AARP checklist of like pedestrian safety features, and we'll give a report to the town on what they can do to improve their safety and pedestrian friendliness and bike friendliness around a transit station. So where we like to see the kind of housing that we usually want to that we associate with missing middle is around transit. And this is a process that is often called transit oriented development, but what we call transit oriented communities, because it sounds nicer is the reason I was given for that change. No, the real reason is because it's not just about housing development. It's also about the safe streets model, biking safety. So making sure that you have a town center or at least some area around a transit station, like a bus stop or a train station, where people can walk, bike, where car traffic is slow, and it isn't one big parking lot. Think a lot of New England downtowns. And the reason we do it that way is because it's a little more sustainable. We try to make it so that your car is not the only way you can get around to do everything. Even if you have to commute to work with a car, maybe you have a grocery store nearby to where you don't have to drive also to get the groceries, or maybe your kids can walk to school, or maybe you go, even something like your dentist being close enough to walk to or bike to gets one more car off the road, which reduces traffic, doesn't tear up your roads as much. It means you need less parking, and what would have been parking is now an apartment or a business or something along those lines. Now, the way of developing the development model that I'm talking about right now is actually traditional development. It's how most towns in America were developed up until around the reforms of the 60s and 70s that started to become more car-centric and started to be more focused on highways. So in this picture, we really like these pictures. You see the Waterbury light rail, you see buses, you see trains. A lot of our early suburbs would have been called streetcar suburbs, especially in Connecticut around New York City, where folks would usually own a car, but in order to get in and out of the city, a light rail line or like a trolley would be the way they would do that most of the time. It meant that they weren't constantly having to drive in and out of the city. Cities and cars really don't mix. Cars take up a lot of space, and they reduce the air quality of cities. So one thing that we find, even though Connecticut is fairly car dependent in a lot of its development, there is a lot of existing transit of varying quality. You have your rail along the coast. Up near Hartford and New Britain, you have the CT fast track lines. In a lot of towns, you have smaller bus services, and they vary in efficiency. Getting to New York on the train is not too bad. The CT fast track is actually highly efficient. It's just very limited in scope. And your local buses tend not to be that effective. One of the reasons being is that development hasn't really occurred around the bus stop. A lot of times a bus stop is just a sign in the middle of nowhere, sometimes without even a sidewalk to lead up to it. So it's really not, it seems like an afterthought. It's not really being designed to be used. And that's not picking on any one town in particular. That's true all over the state. So in order to achieve this, we try to pass laws at the state level. Last year, we tried to pass a law similar to one this year, but the one this year is not our bill. It's been confusing because we do transit-oriented development, and there's a transit-oriented development bill that is not ours. But the one we did last year wanted to mandate within a half-mile radius of a transit station upzoning, so increasing the allowable density, decreasing the parking requirements in a one half-mile radius around all the transit. Well, that was a pretty one-size-fits-all kind of solution, and we were certainly told that enough times last year. So we've changed that language this year, and have done other things to try to put the power more in the hands of the municipality to plan their own transit-oriented development. We still believe that's the way we should develop, and we're still trying to push municipalities toward there, but we really want them to be the drivers of their own development. We also understand that increasing density isn't just a matter of space, it's a matter of capacity. So water, sewer, what have you, are all things that might have to be upgraded or maybe aren't even sufficient for the current number of people using them. So the way we've designed this bill is to make it easier to get those improvements and get state funding for those kinds of improvements as part of your planning process for additional development. We want local planning commissions to be partners in this process. One question I do have for this body is, this is the first, and I'm not sure I totally understand, this is the planning and development, or this committee is not a planning and zoning committee. This is the planning and what's the other part of this?
Conservation, this is our committee
Okay.
for our plan of conservation.
Right.
And development, our 10-year plan.
Okay.
Been meeting on to update, so.
Okay.
This will be a part of that update, if.
I understand.
I think it's fair to say that the people that you're speaking to, there's members of the our planning commission here because they are the lead in our plan of conservation and development, but it's also leaders in the community and department heads. We have someone here from our public utility company. We have our police chief here, heads of boards and commissions and departments are all here. So you're speaking to the major leaders in the communities right now.
Well, thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. And I'll try to tailor some of what I talked about a little more to those things as well. So moving on. So the bill we've come up with this year, which we expect to get the final bill number on this tonight. We've been working with LCO now for a month and a half to try to get this language finalized. But it's called Work, Live, Ride. It is a, I'm not going to read right off the slide, but it is a way to help coordinate state funding toward municipalities so that they can better plan for their own transit-oriented development. So the way this works is it provides an opt-in system. Now, in a town or city, their P&Z would be the organization that would be the body that opts in. In the case where a town has a planning and a zoning, it would be the zoning that opts in. And I'm not exactly sure what this town status would be on that, but if you have a split planning and say that again.
Yeah, we have a planning commission, and with the actual zoning authority is our city council.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, to say the least.
There's only, I think, 3 of us in the state, so.
Okay. Well, very interesting. I'll have to check on who would be the authority on this one. We'll have to make sure we include that in the language.
Well, if
to ensure-
there's zoning commissions are the ones that adopt regulations and communities that you're talking to, regulations or zone changes, those are done by the council here in the city. So they are the zoning authority.
So it should go through the zoning, through that authority.
City
then.
council.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the city council, okay. All right, so this is how it allows you to opt in, and by opting in, you're committing to creating a transit-oriented community district along one of your rail or bus lines. In doing so, you are going to gain access to this new Office of Responsible Growth, which will be able to coordinate state resources and help with the planning. So right now, the Office of Responsible Growth exists, but its scope is fairly limited. We're trying to, with this bill, and I'll get into some of those details in a second, but we're trying to essentially beef up this Office of Responsible Growth and give it the statutory authority to direct and coordinate funding and resources from the state. So in opting in, you are saying, come help us build this district that we're trying to build. So the ORG partners with the community in, like I said earlier, the identifying the location and size of the TOD district, approving it, making sure it abides by the standards we're setting, and ensuring that it's properly funded. They also coordinate with other state agencies, state discretionary funds. Finally, they can assist in identifying potential projects with for affordable housing. We think that this is we're pretty proud of that part of it, because we know a lot of towns are struggling to breach their 830G moratorium. And we know that building especially affordable housing in a transit-oriented development model is usually much better for everyone involved. Walkability and bikeability are great, but especially for a lower income person who maybe can't afford a car, or needs to walk more places, or someone who is elderly who's no longer able to drive, it's good to be able to put them into a place that's a little more compact and dense so they can reach their services in other ways. So there's a lot of funding available in the state right now that we're really trying to get people to take advantage of. Desegregate doesn't tend to ask for money in our bills. We try to consolidate existing funding or make it more efficient and easier to utilize. But there's a lot of state discretionary funding out there. There's federal funding. There's additional funding for transit-oriented development in the governor's budget. And there's an existing TOD program. We find the problem is that they're kind of hard to access. Not all towns have like a full-time planner that's really good at navigating the complex ways the state has to hand out its discretionary funds. So we're trying to make that process a lot easier by linking them up to the Office of Responsible Growth, which would kind of be their one-stop shop for all this funding and assistance. So when it comes to the when it comes to your transit-oriented development district, we have a couple sets of left and right limits that we want you to achieve, or standards we want you to hit. And those standards are based on the kind of community you are, based on the kind of transit you have. So we have three basic categories: rapid transit, transit adjacent, which is then further broken down into population levels. But a rapid transit community is along a rail line or a CT fast track line. Transit community just has your standard bus stop, and a transit adjacent community doesn't have any mass transit, but is adjacent to one of the other two communities. And what they need to do to achieve an in compliance zone would be different depending on all three of them. So for rapid transit, you have above a population, they need to hit a certain density requirement. So 30 an acre at the high end, all the way down to only 10 an acre on the very low end. And I have a slide based on what your town would have to achieve in terms of density a little later on. So I say a little later on, here it is. So you are a transit community based on our study of your transit. Now, what we did is a preliminary study of your transit. You may say, well, our bus stop doesn't actually really qualify, and that might be true. We're not desegregate doesn't ultimately make the decision of what kind of community you are. It would be the ORG. So please let me know if you feel that, like, oh, we might be rapid transit or we might be transit adjacent, depending on, you all know your town a little better than we do. Based on your market, based on the market, based on the market activity of your area, there's also an affordability requirement. This can get up to as high as 20% affordability. For your town, it would be from 5 to 12%, depending on where exactly you put it. Right, so your equivalent to the planning and zoning would determine the size of the TOC district. The Office of Responsible Growth would then identify if you've achieved the standards we're setting out here. So here's some of the standards we have to see in order to have successfully created a TOC district. It has to be of a reasonable size. One thing that people people don't like about this is that reasonable size is vague. Well, it's vague for a reason, because it's also where someone says vague, we say open-ended. We're not trying to tell a town exactly what size or how many acres their transit-oriented development zone has to cover. We think a town is best capable of making that determination. So a reasonable size is the result of a conversation between the ORG and your town. You guys can lay out where you think it should go, how large you want it to be. It could be non-contiguous. It could be larger in some areas and follow maybe a river in some other areas. It's not the bubble that we had attempted to try to put on people last time. So that's that's the reason why reasonable size isn't, we don't dictate acreage, just what you think is best. Now, what it must include is as of right development of mixed use, mixed income housing developments. That's just in line with our TOD model. It must include the affordability levels based on the state housing needs assessment. The number I gave you, the 5 to 12%, is based on that assessment. And then it must not include parking requirements, lot size minimums, or residency restrictions. So all the things that you would associate with a more dense area that doesn't require, that isn't just a lot of parking lots, right? Part of transit-oriented development is reducing a reliance on cars. Now that doesn't mean there's no parking, just that you can't require a certain amount, like a two per unit or whatever. This is the schedule for affordability requirements. So from what I looked up in Norwich, you guys are in the low weak or low strong, depending on where in the town it was. Again, and that's not our numbers, that's the CHAPA market report. So what if the community doesn't opt in? It's an opt-in process, you don't have to do it, but there are drawbacks to not opting into building one. The big drawback is that some of the funding that would have gone to your community to build these, to build this transit-oriented development community zone is that you're no longer going to be able to access those specific discretionary funds related to economic development. This doesn't mean like school funding. This doesn't mean public health or public safety. You can still build a bridge or repair a bridge in your town. It's more in line with this here. So brownfield remediation only for economic development purposes, not for public health purposes. People were confused about that. It's if you have a brownfield leaking into your groundwater and you need it fixed, this would not prevent you from doing so. Revitalization grants, some of these other grants that are competitive, because they're competitive, we want to focus them on areas that are working in the transit-oriented development model. We think that's a good balance of state control and local control there. As well as the transit-oriented development grants. Those should only go to places that are doing transit-oriented development. So our plan to expand the Office of Responsible Growth, this is pretty much the crux of our plan. This is why we think people might want to do this, is because this Office of Responsible Growth will make this development so much easier. So we are asking for money this time around for 4 full-time land use planners, as opposed to what they have now, which is 0 full-time land use planners. That would service the state and acted and be able to assist you in the planning portion of this process. We want to top up the existing transit-oriented development fund, and we want to give the ORG the statutory authority to determine, obviously, your compliance in the program, but also to coordinate other discretionary funding and public resources. So by opting in, you're getting access to essentially another planner for your town, and all of these consolidated state resources. All right, so that's the plan for Work, Live, Ride. The overall goal is to empower municipalities by giving them the resources they need to create transit-oriented development in their town. But I'd be happy to hear any questions you might have about transit-oriented development as a concept or about our bill in particular.
So Tucker, this is a proposed bill that you're putting forward this year, is that it?
That's correct. In fact, all that dinging on my phone might have been that my bill number just dropped. But yeah, so this is going through planning and development right now. It's been raised as a committee bill, which is why it's taken a little bit longer. But that's where we are now.
And did you say there was another bill that that's being proposed along the same lines that your organization isn't involved in?
Yes, so there's a few transit-oriented development bills. There's the, so the governor's bill has a municipal redevelopment authority that has similar goals, that takes it a different direction. There's Senator Looney's transit-oriented development bill that is basically what we did last year. So while we really do like that, the results of that bill, we did find it was difficult to convince people of a more heavy-handed approach. That being said, more power to them. If people decide that they don't mind that, then that's great. There's also Representative O'Day put in a bill on transit-oriented development that would treat transit-oriented developments like distressed municipalities. Unfortunately, we had to oppose that one because we don't want to see money that would have gone to distressed municipalities spread thin. We would like to see different types of funding going into these TODs. But the concept of increasing funding to TOD, we do like. So there's a lot of bills out there right now trying to do similar things, just with different ways of doing it.
Thanks. Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else have questions?
I have a question, Tucker,
Sure.
Deanna Rhodes. Have you worked with the COGS on this
Mhm.
plan for your legislative bill? Only because I didn't hear a mention of, I thought the funding mechanism, it might be interesting if had it been funded through the COGS down to the towns for them to help assist some of the smaller towns that don't have planners.
Yep. So we've met with all the COGs except one who never got back to me, and I think there's the one up in northwest corner. But we've talked through all this language with them. That's not to say all of them are totally in favor of the bill, but we have taken their critiques under consideration. The decision was made early on to go ORG instead of the COGS, and I wasn't around in the organization for exactly all those conversations as to why we went through ORG instead of the COGS. So that would have been a fine way to do it. I think we just ended up going a different direction, and I wish I could tell you a little more why that's the case. But we've met with all of them that'll have us, and we take their considerations very seriously.
Anybody else with questions?
What amount of funding are you proposing here, Tucker? What is the bill?
The hardest number we have is for the four full-time planners. We're ballparking around 600,000 a year, just based on what like the standard pay and all the benefits and stuff they would get. Now, in terms of the TOD top-up fund, that's something we're a little more open-ended on. We've not asked for money before in any of our bills. We've been working a little bit with Kathy Austin to figure out what would make the most sense. I think we said we'd like $50 million a year, but we pretty much want to just put as much money into the TOD fund as we can get. So I think we said 50 million, but knowing that probably won't end up being quite the number we'd like. Pretty much the minimum is just 600,000 to at least get those four full-time planners. That's what we're looking for.
Thank you, Tucker.
Anybody else with questions?
Tucker, can you talk a little bit more about that 5 to 12% number that you had on the slide for Norwich?
Sure thing. So that is the CHAPA, that is based on the CHAPA housing market report. Now, I don't pretend to be an expert in how they achieve, how they come up with their data, but we just took their data. So it's the affordability component of this is based on your market rate or your market activity. Basically, the idea being that a town with a strong market is going to be more able to sustain more affordable housing, because a developer will be more willing to accept more affordable housing in a market that's a little bit stronger than a market that's weaker. We don't want to discourage building because we're putting too much affordability in. So we really want to see affordability, but the way we're doing it is really kind of a compromise of how much we think we can get that a developer will still build. But that's why the numbers are the way they are. Your specific numbers was just I looked up Norwich on a map on the map they provided, and I saw that there were different sections that had different market levels. And which is why I gave you a range of percentages instead of just one percentage, because it would depend on where you built the TOC.
Gotcha. I think the city is awash in affordable housing. It's just not necessarily quality affordable housing.
Mhm.
So we're at almost 20% for the states. We're double
Yeah.
what the state wants, so we don't have any trouble hitting that mark. We just want
Mhm.
improvements. So
Yeah,
would there be an
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
would there be an opportunity through this program to rehab existing affordable multi-unit housing that is TOD in transit adjacent areas?
That's what I was gonna ask. Rehab.
So
New build.
from what I know about Norwich, you get, yeah, almost certainly your downtown is already compliant with our TOD standards. So all you'd have to do is opt in and you'd immediately gain access to all of the discretionary funds.
Yep.
In terms of all the different types of assistance the state can give you, I have to admit that I'm not totally an expert on everything the state can do. I know brownfield remediation is a big one that we'd like to see that be less competitive. So for instance, if you decide to opt in and a town maybe next door doesn't, we're happy to direct those brownfield remediation funds to you guys. The ORG is supposed to be able to coordinate all of these state discretionary resources. So anything that you've used in the past to try to rehabilitate your buildings in your downtown, this should help with that. I know that wasn't quite super specific, but this is meant to make it easier to get state assistance if you opt in. Yeah.
So Tucker, I have a question. So we have an intermodal transportation center, and I'm hoping down the road, we might even have a passenger rail come through the city many years in the future, but still we're working on that. We're part of a study on that. But some of our areas downtown are special flood hazard areas, or, near where these transit areas are. And the state has been very on the fence about, affordable housing and housing in special flood hazard areas, if there's state monies involved. Has this come up at all of that, or any communities that may have an issue with that? If we say the city opted in and then we came up with our transit community area, and it's now in special flood hazards areas.
So there's language it's not in my slides, but there's language in the bill that said like floodplains are exempt. So your transit orient now that's more like wetlands protection is what is in our bill. Like you wouldn't be forced to build on wetlands. In your case, I think because you can design with that reasonable size, well, you would just design you would want to design a TOD section that did not include those areas, and you wouldn't then not be in compliance for TOD because you avoided areas you felt were going to flood.
What if we wanted to, what if you wanted to include an area, because you think that it's really important to have transit oriented development there, that it may fall within that special flood hazard area? Is it going to be excluded and not supported by the state?
That is an excellent question. So that's the opposite kind of question I usually get. Usually it's towns asking me, where can I not build and still get benefits? You're saying I'd like to build even though well,
we're compliant, if the city met all the, if you met all the requirements for the flood hazard areas and the 500-year requirements and all those kind of things, is it going to preclude us from doing that because of this, would the state take a poor look at that?
There's no language in this bill that says that. That seems like it'd be more up to the ORG. But that's a good question. So are you we certainly wouldn't want that to be the case, that you would end up not being able to build somewhere you want to build based on some state policy that already exists that says you can't. That's very interesting. We could probably try to take that language to the committee and maybe add it in as like the sausage is being made in the legislature, try to slip something in along those lines, but I'm not sure what that language would look like, if I'm being honest. If you have anything you can send me about that specific issue, I can bring it up to my executive director, but that's a novel concern that we haven't heard yet. And And while
Well,
I
our
don't think our bill
transit- our-
addresses it, but
Our transit, intermodal transit, building and is actually in a special flood hazard area.
Huh.
It's built in the special flood hazard area and the parking garage and everything is there. So, you know, so it's not saying that we want to be right there, but this area is pretty desirable for, you know. So I guess want to have that conversation.
interesting, yeah. There's nothing in our bill language that specifically says like the ORG will not allow for building in these kinds of areas. But if that interacts in an unintended way with an existing state law, we'll have to look at that language. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But yeah, that's certainly a novel concern we hadn't quite heard yet. So thank you.
Anybody else with questions for Tucker?
Anybody there?
Any of our people who are zooming in, do you have questions?
Nope, not I.
I'm all set, thank you.
Okay. So. Unless we have more questions and unless you have anything you want to add, Tucker, then I think we're going to cut you off.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll tell you, this has been one of my more pleasant presentations to towns. I really appreciate you guys hearing me out. So thank you so much. And we'll have that bill language. Hopefully, cross your fingers for me that we'll have that bill language tonight.
And Tucker, I will send you some comments on the special flood hazard area concerns, that kind of thing, just to make sure that if we were looking at those areas, it might be opportunities for us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's why we come to these meetings, is so that we can get feedback from towns on our bill. So.
Well, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good night. All right. I think that's the only business we had on the agenda tonight.
Yeah.
So Dan or Deanna want to add something at this point?
No, well, Dan's
I'm in
working.
the middle of trying to make a current land use map for the city.
It's a
We've never
nightmare.
had.
It's a nightmare.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is an interesting concept. And I wonder if we could borrow parts of it for, I've mentioned it before, a senior oriented district.
If you notice though, you can't identify, like we couldn't pick for seniors, you can't identify, but like you said, borrow something similar to
Right,
doing something.
you know,
but-
something, or an area, let's say within a half a mile of the hospital. Where we could encourage businesses, you know, like a lot of Lafayette Street has already got the professional staffs.
Yeah.
You know, maybe a better transit in that area. If there are availabilities for building small apartments, affordable apartments for seniors,
Mhm.
but have an enterprise zone for seniors, making it more able for them to get, you know, a grocery store, you know, things of that nature.
Definitely.
Yeah, we certainly could have something that allowed for mixed use buildings along there with apartments and.
I think so too, in that area.
Well, I
Because you-
think your
utility
question,
infrastructure.
Dan, was exactly what I was thinking of. Can the money be used for rehabbing buildings as opposed to just new development? Because
Yeah.
we've got so much that needs to be rehabbed within the area that would probably be a TOC. You know, rather than, because we don't have a lot of open space to build.
Well, Sydney has funding available, just people aren't taking advantage of it.
Yeah,
For the
so
rehab?
community development block grant is very stringent on what you can spend money or not. I can't build any new housing, but I can tear down a house and build the same house again. So
And you've got a
it's,
lot of money
we
in the
get,
fund at the moment.
every year we get about $800,000. 20% of that goes to admin so that we can run the program. 15% goes to public services to help low income individuals. And the remaining 60% is, or I'm sorry, 65% is supposed to go towards LMI benefit. Either in blight attempts, public services, or activities, projects that are intended to benefit low and moderate people,
You're
building a
having hard
community
time
center.
Finding words coming to get
Yes.
the money.
Yep, so we have a lot of landlords in town. It's a lot of paperwork. And we put a lien on the property because it's a zero interest loan. So it's very financially beneficial to folks who would otherwise have to put that on their credit card. But some landlords come through the program. They have other condemnations with the city. Well, we can't put another loan if you're already not paying your condemnation. Or, the whole program is meant to help with code fixes and whatnot. If they have to house low income tenants, so that the point is to benefit the tenant. So we're not gonna put money, the city's not gonna give you money for then you to charge $2,000 a month on your rent. So we try really hard to work with folks and make it applicable to them, but there is a general mistrust of giving all your financial information to the city, and so that is kind of a stopper for us, but we're always looking for units to do. We run the program year round and we allot at least $200,000 a year towards the actual rehab.
No, it'd be nice if people took more advantage of it.
I know.
In combination with lead rehab, so we have a whole nother grant that we
Yeah.
merge those together, and the lead is free, so.
Okay, we have, anybody else have any issues or matters they want to talk about tonight before we adjourn? Okay, hearing nothing, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Have a motion
Second.
and a second. I don't think that's a debatable motion, so all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion to adjourn always in order.
Yeah, it's not debatable, I don't think.
Yeah, no, just got. Not any better, not any worse. It's